So this is a channel that, for the most part, is about Western animation. Mostly America, but also Europe. I made that one video on Mars Express. And this is primarily just because these are among the largest and most noteworthy industries in the world for animation. And also just because, I am American. Unfortunately, I talk about American animation like I'm the fucking arbiter of truth for this shit. Like, I care more about this than anybody else in the world. I have nothing more than an unfathomable and undying love for the medium above everything else. But the truth is, I'm kind of being disingenuous when I talk like that. Not in the sense that I don't love animation, of course I do. Other than YouTube and self-loathing, it's among the only things about myself that have remained consistent over the course of my entire life. And yet, despite that, I have found myself consistently disappointed by American animation nearly every single time. Sometimes it's warranted, but other times I feel like there's just something wrong with me because for me personally, shows that everyone thinks are just amazing, I just think are 7 out of 10. These are shows that are good, but like, when am I gonna find that something, that one 10 out of 10 show that is just so good, it completely recontextualizes the quality of everything else that I've seen? Arguably, this is a result of my somewhat selective taste in media, but I believe that a healthy and thriving medium is one which has the broadness to occupy niches like mine, ones which favor a willingness to experiment and push boundaries, things which, following up on what I have said earlier, I have encountered among live-action film and television and video games, and these are things that I don't even like as much as animation on a base level. Even like the best stuff that I've seen, I would not put among my all-time favorites for like everything else, all mediums included. And even then with stuff like that, I often question how much do I really like these things, or am I forcing myself to like it more than I actually do because my standards are slightly lower? And at this point you might be asking, okay, why do you even care then? What, you talk so much about the potential of the medium and yet you claim to have never seen said potential actually put into practice, so then what are you even talking about? What have you seen that makes you so convinced that animation is objectively the greatest artistic medium for storytelling of all time? Parentheses, this is a serious and unironic belief that I hold. If you're not a complete moron, you already know the answer to that question based on context clues. I have kind of a weird relationship with anime. It's kind of like the opposite of what I have with Western animation, where I like it in practice more than I like it in principle. I used to fucking hate anime, like, a lot. And yeah, this was back in 2017, where if you were an 8th grader and thought Filthy Frank was the second coming of Jesus, that was kind of a guarantee. But I had actually watched anime, and I liked none of them. I didn't like My Hero Academia, despite having come up with a functionally identical premise for a story about a school of people with superpowers back when I was like 11 years old. I didn't like Sword Art Online, despite being a self-identifying gamer with a god complex and sexual frustration. And I definitely didn't like Ouran Host High Club, which actually makes the most sense given that I'm not a Fujoshi, etc. I wasn't just blindly hating it based on what was cool to do at the time. I had actual legitimate reason to discredit the medium after watching what were the most beloved and popular shows at the time and not liking them. So what was my problem then? I was only looking at the surface level of anime, the idea, the principle of anime, which I mentioned earlier. Anime, for some reason or another, is a medium that has been consistently shackled by the shallow perceptions of it by the collective consciousness of popular culture. The idea of anime is so much more interesting to people than what anime actually is. Anime, by definition, is just animation but Japanese. But anime, written in quotation marks as to denote the literal understanding from the colloquial one, has a kind of mythology behind it. Giant robots, teenagers saving the world with superpowers, hyper-emotive character acting and writing, shouting attack names, comic relief pervert, panty shots, 15-year-olds with giant tits, tentacle porn, adult women who look like lollies, tsundere, yandere, kudere, big eyes, lack of lip sync, crazy theme songs. Even the fans themselves have become reduced to pieces of iconography to be memed. I could be reading stuff off TV tropes all day if I wanted to, but somehow I feel like suicide is a preferable option to that. I admit that part of this is because the fans themselves feed into it, and in return the anime industry itself feeds back. And if you know nothing about anime and you see fans of it jerking off Child Rapist Wish Fulfillment Simulator 2024 as one of the greatest fantasy shows of all time, it's kind of easy to believe that that's all there is in the medium. But if you actually make an effort to ignore the fandom and just go out of your way to find shows that you might actually enjoy, you soon realize just how criminally misrepresented anime is in pop culture. Yes, There is slop. There is lots of slop. This is undeniable. But that's not unique to anime. American animation suffers from the same problems. Everything suffers from the same problems, even when taking a quote-unquote more respected medium like literature. The most popular books of the last couple years are just like actual pornography. This shit is literally isekai ecchi slave harem shows for women. The only difference is that with anime, it's as though the medium is judged by the fan base rather than the shows themselves. So yeah, I sat my ass down, watched Evangelion instead of just looking at the fans, which do nothing but talk about which teenager they want to fuck more, watched Lane instead of just looking at the fans, which do nothing but make awful breakcore edits for their lay quirky internet femcel aesthetic, watched Monster instead of looking at the fans, which do nothing but make cringeworthy Johan Liebert Sigma Grindset edits on TikTok, and realized, okay, yeah, this is the best fucking shit I've ever seen in my life. I don't want to say this because people are gonna thing Japan me like crazy, but as a person with substantial experience watching both American and Japanese animation is just way far ahead of us artistically on every level. And honestly, I hate to admit this beyond the thing Japan shit, because I should like American animation more, because I like it more on a base level stylistically. And even as a person who will admit that they think anime is better, it's because of this that I believe that the very idea of American anime is fucking stupid and should stop being made. Let me lay down some animation history for you all to provide context for the arguments I'm about to make. Here's the thing. A lot of people like to view anime as this completely insular thing, completely immune to influence from foreign styles or cultures. Kind of a similar line to thinking many hold about Japan as a whole, and it's similar in the sense that it's not true. Of course, nowadays you're not getting shows that are influenced by American animation, but go back, and I mean like way back to the mid-20th century with Osamu Tezuka, a guy which, if you haven't heard of him, then I don't trust your opinion on anything animation related. If you made a timeline of the history of Japanese animation and comics, there is before Tezuka and after Tezuka. This man is the foundation, the godfather, as he's often called, of everything that we know as anime and manga. Dude revolutionized the industry by cranking out 1,000,000 billion manga, of which includes stuff like Astro Boy and Dororo. Classics so classic, they're still being reinterpreted and adapted into anime to this day. And like I said, the guy was doing this with basically zero point of reference for works in his home country. AniList won't even let you go before 1970 in its search engine, and if you alter the link to do so anyway, you're left with a bunch of shit that literally no one has seen. So then what was he influenced by, which created a style so revolutionary, it essentially legitimized an entire art form into becoming among the most important cultural touchstones in post-war Japan? Walt Disney. Classic cartoon shorts like Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Betty Boop, and the more ambitious feature lengths of the time like Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo. I mentioned earlier the epic funny joke about how anime characters have such big eyes, but you want to know why that is? Because of Tezuka. And you want to know why he drew them that way? Because he watched Bambi literally 80 fucking times. Okay, so why is this important? Well, it's necessary to recognize that anime, despite initially being dominated by its own influences, evolved stylistically to the point where it surpassed them. And it did so by creating its own identity and moving beyond its base level, something which I often criticize the American animation industry for not doing. Tezuka is often described as Japan's Walt Disney, and in terms of influence, that's accurate, but when looking at the content of the work itself, it's night and day. Tezuka saw past the limitations of comics and animation as merely a children's medium, and started incorporating elements into his stories that were far darker and experimental and philosophically charged compared to a lot of Disney stuff. Dororo is gory as hell, Phoenix is super high concept and avant-garde conceptually, and even Astro Boy, which is still generally a family-friendly story, was very politically driven by pro-environmentalist, anti-discriminatory, and anti-war themes. You could argue that some of this was simplistic and juvenile, but that's to be expected from a medium in its infancy. These were not, and to this day still not, for the most part, common in American animation. These were things unique to himself and his own artistic vision that he put in the work, and without them, his art would not be nearly as impactful or influential without them. And because of that, anime is a relatively self-sustaining medium that doesn't need to take influence from more developed cultures to prop itself up. And once again, it is the inverse for American animation. While Japan was taking influence from America as it remained mostly insular, it is now America taking influence from Japan while the latter remains mostly insular. Let's go back once again. Not so far though. Right here, Christmas Day 1989, a week after The Simpsons Episode 1 first air, and the day which Akira was finally released in American theaters. This movie is so fucking good, I can't even put it into words. Top 3 anime, top 1 anime movie, borderline top 5 anything for me. I like it even more than the manga. Along with the aforementioned Evangelion and Lane, it was one of the first anime I had watched that truly opened my eyes to the medium, and they were feelings which were identical to the collectively blown minds of sheltered American audiences whose only perceptions of animation at the time were, once again, still just Disney movies and cartoons. There are a lot of videos about the impact Akira had on anime. I personally recommend Super Eye Patch Wolf's video, but to do a massive TLDR, it basically made Americans aware of the very concept of Japanese animation. And not only did it exist, but it was fucking insane. It was everything I described as noteworthy in Tezuka's work, cranked to the max, uber violence, and extremely complicated, borderline incomprehensible plot with tons of weird and surreal elements, all acting as this incredibly well-written, politically motivated metaphor about humanity and its capacity for destruction in a post-nuclear world. But despite the fact that Japanese animation was clearly showing itself to the industry as something meant to be taken seriously, and even with a lot of animated shows at the time being partially outsourced to Japanese studios, it was very much slow rolling in the amount of actual palpable influence it would have throughout the 90s, and it wasn't really until the 2000s that shows made very clearly within the context of artists who were aware of anime started appearing. You can pin this down to a lot of factors. This was when the internet started becoming larger, allowing for Western anime fandom to expand, along with a far greater ease of digital distribution of anime. Also, with Toonami shifting its focus to airing stuff like Dragon Ball around the same time, as well as just a broader generational shift from older artists who grew up within an entirely Western-centric frame of reference, and those who grew up watching anime and being influenced by it now becoming fresh blood of the industry. Of course, you had your cliches of Akira bike slides and wow, isn't anime just so quirky parodies, but this was when you had shows popping up that were very overtly influenced by anime stylistically. Stuff like Teen Titans, Megas XLR, The Boondocks, even stuff that's still more in the camp of Western stylings like Samurai Jack and Batman Beyond, most animated superhero shows actually, all of which drew artistically just as much, if not more so, from anime as it did Western animation. And all of this culmination of Western anime fandom and Toonami and a new generation and all of these shows, yada yada yada, resulted in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Hypothetically, if you asked every animation fan on the internet what the best animated show of all time was and then compiled it into a list based on what was the most suggested shows, I have no doubt in my mind that Avatar would be number 1. And as contrarian as I tend to be, I don't really have any problems with that. It's kind of like the American equivalent of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Is it my favorite show ever? No, but I still think it's really good and definitely deserves to be placed at number 1. Oh, what the fuck? Okay, well that really kills my analogy. What's a new show that would be higher than Avatar? Arcane? Yeah, Arcane, definitely that. It's so fascinating that the show came out in 2005, and yet animated shows which attempt to reach its level of quality are still very few and far between. And that's coming from a guy who, like I said, doesn't even think this show is like the greatest thing ever. Was there dramatic, serialized storytelling in animated shows before Avatar? Yeah, there was. But it was so incredibly rare, and the places it did exist in did not have nearly the same level of ambition in terms of character writing, world building, political commentary, theming. I mean, yeah, okay, it is just a kid's show, I guess, more like a young adult show that happens to be rated Y7, okay, but even among shows that people place alongside Avatar, this level of depth was, and still kind of is, unprecedented for American animation. But the most important thing about Avatar, for the purposes of this video, is that it essentially acts as the epicenter for this entire relationship between Western animation wanting to become more like anime. In one way or another, everything comes back to this show, because this is a show that owes so much, if not its entire identity, to anime, that it essentially fragmented what the term meant in half. Anime now no longer means just Japanese animation. Anime is now a distinctive and specific style that can be identified and replicated. And partly because of how good Avatar was, it's also something that is understood as somehow superior to other forms of animation. And this is where it starts. You know, in the early to mid-2010s, there were a lot more tasteful blends of both influences from American and Japanese animation, even in shows that weren't really that good, and I partially blame this due to the success of Adventure Time and the cancellation of Symbionic Titan. But now, around the past 5 years or so, anime has become among the most dominant pieces of popular culture among younger generations, to the point of totally eclipsing American and Western animation, and thus resulting in the birth of American anime, which is both a bad idea on principle and a bad idea in practice. Okay, my last point was a bit disingenuous. There was one show in the early 2010s that, as far as my knowledge goes, was the first real show to be advertised as a true blue American anime. It was Ruby. This show sucks. Yeah, no, I know the show is his fan base, but I'm not gonna mince words here. The show is badly written, incredibly derivative, poorly animated, inconsistent as hell. H-Bomber guy made like a fucking 2.5 hour video going into detail about how it fails as a show on every conceivable level. It's just really bad. But like I said, it does have a fan base, and my opinion on as to why is in part due to its status as not just an original independent animated series, but as an original independent quote-unquote anime series. Which is really funny, because Ruby has an understanding of anime as a medium that is just about as superficial as a show like My Life Me. It derives so much in the most shallow ways imaginable, where anime is nothing more than the surface level aesthetic of pop culture tropes and cliches that I mentioned in the first part of the video. Is it a coincidence that the one thing it takes the most from is Avatar? A show that was good not because it looked like anime, but because it had good writing and characters and storytelling and etc. But obviously that just went over the creators' heads and thought anime equal good. It's stupid and it's reductive and it's frustrating to even think about. I'm ripping into Ruby specifically because, as the first of its kind, it really acts as a bad omen for what is to come for the future. It's like a microcosm that epitomizes all of my problems with the very premise of
American anime.
That you can have a show that has absolutely terrible writing and yet still manages to amass a huge fandom of supporters because of this cheap, surface-level aesthetic of anime whose mythology draws people in on principle alone and unfairly degrades the potential of American animation. Here's a fun game. If you type "is arcane" into Google, the first result field that pops up is arcane anime, which is fucking absurd for reasons which should be obvious. It's animated by a French studio based off of an American video game series published by an American company, released in English by default, and if the fact that it actually is competently animated CGI didn't make it clear, it doesn't even fucking look like anime. This line of reasoning makes absolutely no sense unless you're under the insane assumption that Japan somehow owns the concept of animated shows that go beyond episodic comedy. This phenomenon, not just unique to Arcane, this was happening a lot with Blue Eye Samurai as well, which I guess makes more sense because that show takes place in Japan, but whatever. This is a direct consequence of the mythologizing of anime as this thing which is innately superior to other forms of animation. It propagates this idea that animated shows can't be good unless they're anime, which is an incredibly limiting, grossly reductive philosophy that actively harms the medium and the industry as a whole. It creates an artistic box as to what kinds of stories which can be told and from which perspectives they can be told from. What makes animation so powerful as a medium is the immense breadth of creative freedom one has and how they choose to convey a story, naturally allowing for a huge variety of different styles and ideas spanning the entire spectrum of the human experience. This is part of why I value American animation as highly as I do anime, despite generally enjoying individual works of anime more, because even though it's still somewhat an issue, there is a far greater stylistic variety amongst shows, not even just on a visual level, but also in the styles of writing. Even the most stylistically divergent anime are still registerable as anime to some extent, unless you're going into territory completely disconnected from the industry. By continuing to draw so heavily from anime to the extent which they identify as such, it also carries over the homogenization of style, which for animation within the realm of pop culture, this is to be expected, as that's the nature of pop culture. But when it begins to infect areas of the industry which are meant to act as the alternative, the boundary pushing, those which innovate by going against what is expected of animation as more than just children's shows or comedies, when those begin to regress into stagnation and conformity, that's when it really starts bothering me. And because of their superficial understanding of anime, the absolute worst aspects of anime are drawn from, taking not from the capacity for more diverse and compelling narratives for broader audiences, but rather its tendency to churn out factory-grade mediocrity, which succeeds on principle of having flashy aesthetics and a marketable style to capitalize on a pre-established audience which won't question what they watch, rather than actually putting in the effort to have original ideas and good writing. That's what it all comes down to in the end, being unique, being different, having your own artistic vision. That's all I want out of American and Western animation. Too much of it is a poor attempt at replicating something which it will never be. Ironically, a good example of this is with Avatar itself, a show which people refuse to let go of despite having been finished for over 16 years. And Avatar is a good show, but propping it up as this ultimate standard by which all animation should and will forever be held to is not a good thing. Avatar itself was limited artistically by its inability to break beyond the shackles of being a kid's network, and if you think that's as good good as things can get, then you really need to broaden your tastes. The thesis of this video is this: American animation should stop attempting to replicate anime, because not only do these attempts demonstrate both a shallow understanding of what they are drawing from and what they are creating, but they actively inhibit the artistic evolution of the medium, which can only be done so by drawing from original and unique ideas that come from within. Am I saying that we shouldn't draw any influence from anime at all? No, of course not. Truthfully, I think it'll be necessary given how much further ahead of us it is. And Pantheon, the show I make it a point to mention in every video because I earnestly believe it's the best written American animated show ever made, despite having exactly 12 fans, is very influenced by anime. But the difference between a show like Castlevania and a show like Pantheon is the difference between drowning in your influences and transcending them. Ironically, it's the most overtly anime-influenced parts of Pantheon, which I think is where the show shows its weakest parts, especially the art style, which my friend describes as Diet Invincible, which, I mean, it looks better than Invincible, but you understand. But anyways, I believe this because my entire philosophy towards animation, which, if it wasn't obvious if you watch my videos, is to expect more, to not lower my expectations, to judge it with a critical eye as I would anything else, because I believe that animation has the potential to be just as good as everything else. And seeing shows, anime-esque or otherwise, constantly get a pass despite massive, enormous writing faults, it just upsets me. And when I criticize shows that are relatively popular, I'm afraid that people are going to watch this video and dismiss what I have to say by labeling me as some kind of elitist, when that is the exact opposite of who I am and what I want. I fucking hate being in the minority. It sucks ass. I want what I like and what I believe in to be more widespread. That's the entire fucking point of making these videos and this channel, is to encourage people to be more critical of animation as a medium, because that's a form of tough love, which will allow it to flourish far more than blind infatuation. God. I don't have anything else left to say here. If you want some examples of animated shows and anime, which I think you should be watching instead, I literally made an entire video's worth of them that you can see in like 60 seconds, because I know nobody's attention span keeps them watching a YouTube video past that amount of point in time anyways, so I guess I probably should have put this at the beginning of the video instead of the end. Whatever, just watch the video, okay? And then watch the shows in that video, please. Please.
This dog is... Wait, what the fuck?